when we came to this location, we met a lot of resistance from the Lakorawas because this is one of their strongholds. And they usually come here in their 50s, 100s to carry out admin and go back to the bush.
They say the sun rises in the east, a simple truth of geography. But for centuries, the world's center of gravity felt firmly anchored elsewhere. All eyes looked to the west. It was the source of power, not just in its guns, but in the boardrooms that financed them. It was the wellspring of technology, the forge of innovation, and the sole purveyor of the modern tools of defense. The narrative was simple, a story told so often it became an unbreakable truth. Africa buys, Europe sells. Africa depends, Europe provides. This wasn't just a trade balance, it was a state of mind, a carefully constructed hierarchy. This was the unspoken rule of the global order, a dynamic etched into treaties, budgets, and the architecture of international relations. For generations, African nations, rich in resources and spirit, were told they needed outside help to protect their own borders. The irony was staggering. A continent of immense wealth, perpetually positioned as a supplicant. They were customers in a market they did not control, forced to accept equipment that was often outdated, overpriced, or tied to political concessions. Their security was a subscription service, reliant on the whims of nations thousands of miles away. It was a vicious cycle of dependency, a chain forged not of steel, but of policy, economics, and a technological gap designed to keep them dependent. But change, like the Harmattan wind, was coming. It started not as a roar, but as a whisper carried on the Saharan breeze. A murmur in university labs, a bold idea sketched in a Lagos cafe. A quiet, fierce determination was taking root in the heart of West Africa. It was the voice of a new generation that saw the old arrangement not as a law of nature, but as a problem to be solved. The old proverb says, "The best time to plant a tree was 20 years ago. The second best time is now." Nigeria, the giant of Africa, was tired of waiting for permission, tired of condescending partnerships and second-hand solutions. It was time to plant its own forest. The year 2025 was not just another tick on the calendar, it became a declaration of intent, a line drawn in the sand. It was the year Nigeria decided to stop asking for a seat at the table and started building its own from the ground up. This wasn't just about weapons, it was about sovereignty in its purest form. It was about intellectual independence, about owning the blueprints to your own future. It was about a nation looking inward, mining its own ingenuity to find the strength it was always told to seek elsewhere. The goal was no longer to be a good customer, but to be the architect of its own security. The old world order was comfortable, it was profitable, it was predictable. In plush boardrooms across Europe, defense contractors planned their futures on the certainty of African markets. Political leaders in Brussels, London, and Paris held summits, confident in their position as the gatekeepers of military might. The idea of an African nation, particularly Nigeria, not just assembling, but innovating and producing its own advanced military hardware. It was an ambition to be politely acknowledged, but never taken seriously. It was a scenario relegated to academic papers and obscure think tank discussions, a theoretical possibility for a far-off century, not a looming reality. They watched Africa through the distorted lens of outdated reports and ingrained prejudice, but they weren't truly seeing the shift happening on the ground. And then, it happened. The world woke up in 2025 to a new reality. The whispers became a roar, the suspense was over, replaced by a stunning revelation that sent shockwaves through the corridors of power from the Potomac to the Rhine. Nigeria didn't just announce a new rifle, it unveiled a comprehensive, homegrown defense ecosystem. It revealed sophisticated drones that could rival the best international models, a secure communications network impervious to foreign eavesdropping, and armored vehicles designed for its own rugged landscapes. It showcased indigenous rifles, built not from borrowed blueprints, but from a deep understanding of the African terrain. It was a technological leap so audacious, so complete, that it left the old guards speechless, their forecasts turned to dust. Europe thought Africa would always depend on them. In 2025, Nigeria, with the pride of a continent behind it, proved them profoundly wrong. The era of dependency was over. A new era had begun. The moment of revelation did not come from a leaked document or a grainy satellite photo whispered in the corridors of foreign intelligence. It came with the full, unapologetic pride of a nation ready to declare its arrival on its own terms. At a meticulously planned military exhibition just outside Abuja, the air was thick with polite expectation. But under the watchful gaze of African leaders and the suddenly stunned silence of foreign military attachés, Nigeria didn't just pull back the curtain. It tore it down. The first to be revealed were the drones. These were not the flimsy, off-the-shelf quadcopters many had anticipated. These were sleek, predatory machines. Their names, drawn from Nigerian culture, were a statement in themselves. The Acer, or hawk, a patient eye in the sky for reconnaissance, and the Amotekun, or leopard, a silent hunter for combat. The specifications, when they were read aloud, sent a palpable ripple of disbelief through the audience. The Acer reconnaissance drone boasted an operational ceiling and endurance that didn't just compete with, but directly rivaled the most respected American and Israeli models. It was capable of staying airborne for over 30 hours, a persistent, unblinking sentinel able to monitor vast swathes of territory. The Amotekun was a different beast entirely. It was a true hunter-killer, armed with a payload of precision-guided munitions. And then came the detail that landed like a shockwave. The munitions, the guidance systems, the entire lethal package was proudly stated to be developed domestically. This wasn't just owning the arrow, it was about forging the arrowhead. This wasn't reverse engineering or assembling foreign kits. This was genuine, ground-up innovation. The engineers had developed proprietary guidance systems and encrypted communication links designed specifically to be resilient against the most sophisticated electronic warfare tactics. In a world of digital espionage, Nigeria had just declared its data sovereignty in the battle space. These drones were not built for parade grounds. They were forged in the crucible of Nigeria's unique security challenges. They were designed to hunt insurgents in dense forests, provide persistent overwatch for ground troops, and deliver precise, low-collateral strikes with devastating accuracy. The engineers at Daikin hadn't designed these in a sterile lab, isolated from the field. They had worked hand-in-hand with soldiers returning directly from the front lines of the Sambisa Forest and the Lake Chad Basin. Every piece of feedback was a lesson paid for in hardship. Every aspect, from the heat-resistant coatings designed for the Sahelian sun to the reinforced dust filters on the engines, was a direct response to the harsh realities of operating in West Africa. These were not just Nigerian-made, they were Nigerian-proven. The sight of these advanced machines, taxiing on a Nigerian runway under the command of Nigerian operators, was more powerful than any political speech. It was a declaration of capability, a projection of sovereign power. The savannah now had its own eyes in the sky, its own claws, and they were entirely, indisputably Nigerian. A new guardian was watching over the continent. After the shock of the drones settled, the focus shifted to the ground, to the infantrymen. For years, Nigerian soldiers had carried a chaotic mix of rifles sourced from all over the globe, a logistical nightmare of incompatible ammunition, spare parts, and training protocols. But now, a single, unified solution was presented: the OBJ-25. Its variants were named not with sterile codes, but with titles of power and respect from Yoruba heritage: Oduduwa, the progenitor; Jagun, the warrior; Balogun, the warlord. It was a rugged, modular platform, chambered in a caliber chosen for its performance in open terrain. It combined the legendary reliability needed for the African environment with modern ergonomics, optics-ready rails, and full customization. The manufacturing process itself was a breakthrough for the nation's industrial capacity, utilizing advanced 3D printing for rapid prototyping and computer-aided manufacturing for mass production with exacting tolerances. This was high technology, scaled for a nation. For the soldier on the ground, this is more than just a new weapon. Carrying a rifle built in his own country by his own countrymen instills a profound and different kind of pride. It's a tangible connection to home. It is a constant, physical reminder in their hands that the nation, its industry, and its people stand directly behind them on the front line. The OBJ-25 was not just a weapon. It was a vote of confidence in Nigeria's own ability to defend itself from the sky above to the ground below. The news from Abuja did not arrive in Brussels, Paris, or London with a bang. It wasn't a sudden explosion on the world stage. Instead, it seeped in, a ghost in the machine of encrypted diplomatic cables. The initial reaction wasn't panic. No, it was a kind of profound and unnerving silence. It was the sound of analysts and diplomats across the continent staring at their screens, utterly dumbfounded. The data was irrefutable, but the conclusion felt impossible. The prevailing assumption, a comforting one, was that this had to be a smokescreen, a clever repackaging of Chinese hardware, or a secret deal with the Russians. Analysts were tasked with finding the technological fingerprints of a known global power, because the alternative, that this was a genuinely indigenous leap forward, was simply too paradigm-shattering to accept. For decades, Europe's relationship with Africa had been built on a foundation of paternalism. It was a world view woven into its foreign policy, a quiet but firm belief in its own technological and institutional superiority. It was about providing aid, guiding development, and setting the terms of engagement. Nigeria's breakthrough didn't just challenge this assumption, it demolished it. The silence was the sound of a worldview cracking. Once the initial shock subsided, it was replaced by a frantic scramble for answers. The intelligence communities across Europe were in overdrive. The failure was not just a lack of information, but a profound failure of imagination. They had been looking for the wrong things, blinded by prejudice and outdated assumptions about African capabilities. The findings that began to trickle in painted a picture not of foreign conspiracy, but of a colossal, self-inflicted intelligence blunder. It was a failure rooted in decades of institutional arrogance, a blind spot the size of a continent. The sense of wounded pride was immense. European defense contractors, who had long viewed Nigeria as a captive market, were now facing an entirely new reality. The balance of power in those relationships had shifted overnight. It was no longer a seller's market. The rhetorical question, once a punchline in Pan-African circles, now echoed through the corridors of power in Europe with chilling seriousness. For decades, the arms trade was a one-way street, a cornerstone of European economic and foreign policy. It was a tool of leverage. It was a source of immense profit. It wasn't just about the loss of a single customer. It was about the terrifying precedent it set. The Nigerian model was now a viable, proven path for other African nations to follow. Suddenly, the map of Africa looked different, a landscape of potential competitors, not just clients. The discomfort came from the dawning realization that they had no good answer. There was no file, no policy paper, no contingency plan for a technologically self-sufficient Africa. The entire strategic framework for engaging with the continent was now obsolete. European leaders were now forced to confront a future where their relationship with African nations would have to be renegotiated, not as patrons and clients, but as equals. The silence from Europe was the sound of them grappling with this uncomfortable new reality, a world where their guns were no longer the only option on the table. To really understand the magnitude of Nigeria's achievement, you've got to first understand the depth of the valley from which it climbed. Africa's story of military dependency is a long and frankly tragic one, a legacy of colonialism that lingered long after the flags of independence were raised. This created a crippling cycle of dependency. To defend their hard-won sovereignty, African nations had to spend precious foreign reserves on weapons, money that could have built schools, hospitals, roads. This system gave foreign powers immense leverage. A shipment of spare parts could be delayed to influence a UN vote. A sale of fighter jets could be cancelled to punish a foreign policy decision. This history of outsourced security did more than just drain treasuries. it eroded confidence. This psychological barrier was perhaps the most formidable chain of all. Nigeria's decision to pursue military self-reliance wasn't just about national pride. It was a cold, hard, strategic calculation born from decades of brutal conflict. There were times when crucial operations were stalled, just waiting for a shipment of ammunition or a vital spare part. These delays weren't just logistical headaches, they were measured in lives lost. At critical moments in its campaign against terror, Nigeria faced arms embargoes from its traditional Western partners. The practical effect was that it crippled the Nigerian military's ability to protect its citizens. The realization dawned in Abuja that true sovereignty was impossible as long as the nation's arsenal was subject to the veto of a foreign power. It meant redirecting billions of dollars away from foreign arms purchases and into research, development, and manufacturing. Every locally produced component was an act of liberation. While Nigeria's breakthrough was a seismic event, it did not happen in a vacuum. Across the continent, other nations had already been taking their own steps. The difference in Nigeria's case was the scale, speed, and comprehensive nature of its success. Nigeria unveiled an entire integrated ecosystem. This new Nigerian model, combining political will, human capital, public-private synergy, and strategic focus, was the ultimate act of defiance. Nigeria had not just broken its own chains, it had shown the entire continent the key to unlocking their own. The news of Nigeria's breakthrough did not stop at its borders. It traveled across the continent like a spark carried on the dry Harmattan wind. For leaders and citizens in neighboring countries, this was not a story about a rival's ascendancy. It was a story about family, a moment of shared victory. A single bracelet does not jingle. Nigeria's was the first jingle, calling others to form a chorus. The effect was particularly strong within ECOWAS. Leaders began to speak with a new confidence about African solutions for African problems. The idea of a pan-African defense industry, once a topic for academic conferences, suddenly felt urgent and achievable. What if they could pool their resources and build a continental shield together? Imagine Nigerian emoticon drones providing air cover, Ghanaian special forces operating on the ground, communicating through a secure network developed in Kenya, while troops ride in armored vehicles built in South Africa. The conversation shifted to specialization. Nigeria, drones; South Africa, armored vehicles; Egypt, naval shipbuilding. This approach would prevent a costly arms race. A unified defense, the ultimate expression of Pan-Africanism. Ubuntu, I am because we are, applied to security. The ripple effect extended far beyond the military sphere, promising to reshape Africa's economic landscape. Nigeria could now move from consumer to major producer. Africa had been sending billions to Europe, America, Asia for military hardware. That money could now circulate within Africa. This new economic order would cascade across industries. Composites for drones become lighter car parts. Guidance software becomes logistics solutions for shipping. Until the lion learns to write, every story will glorify the hunter. In 2025, Nigeria and Africa began to write its own story. Military might. Economic liberation. The rise of a new powerhouse on the world stage. We return to the global stage, a stage irrevocably altered by the events of 2025. What remains is a new, undeniable truth. The world has been rebalanced. The speechless shock has given way to a grudging respect, a reluctant acknowledgement that the continent they once saw as a dependent client is now a formidable peer. The old African proverb says, "Until the lion learns to write, every story will glorify the hunter." For generations, the story of global power was written by the hunters. Nigeria's breakthrough was a thunderous roar, but it was also the moment the lion picked up the pen. This new narrative is not written in ink on paper, but in the precise engineering of a drone's wing, the rugged steel of a rifle, and the complex code of an encrypted network. As this new chapter of history begins, its epigraph is a timeless piece of diaspora wisdom. I am because we are, and we are because I am. This new chapter is being written every day, written in the steel being forged in a Jakarta, written in the fire of the engine of an AA drone, written in the unbreakable courage of the young engineer in a Lagos tech hub. To the youth of Africa and the diaspora, this is your moment. Do not wait for permission or for a seat at a table that was not set for you. Build your own. As Nigeria, a new is upon us, and not by what Africa is, but by what Africa builds. This new chapter is being written for all the world to see. A story written in steel, a story forged in fire, and a story carried forward by an unbreakable, unapologetic, and everlasting courage. This is Insight Africa, where the continent speaks for itself,